Hello, and welcome back to the Odontos-Placata Naval Wargame campaign, the fight for the Galapagos. Last time, we briefly reviewed the order of battle for both sides, and today's video is going to be a more in-depth look at the different ships and airplanes that we have chosen to fight out in the seas of the Eastern Pacific. First, we're going to go through the ships in detail, then the aircraft, and then we'll revisit that order of battle and talk about the implications of some of the capabilities and capability gaps on the shape of our campaign. Let's get into it. All right, so what I've done for my own convenience is organized into this sheet binder both the planes and the ships that we're going to use for this campaign. And got them nicely sorted by tab here. First, let's go over what ships do in Harpoon and what we need to know about them. We need to know their size and their signature. Size tells us how they maneuver. Signature tells us how they're found on radar and sonar. Ships may tow acoustic countermeasures to lure away torpedoes. Electronic support are antennas and processors that are capable of listening to enemy radar signals. The combat system describes how well everything is integrated and how speedily the ship can react. Ships also have armor, and I've noted down a fuel system that I've kind of tacked on. We'll see if that ever really comes up. Over a 10-day campaign, I suspect it may not. Below this, I've noted the sensors. We've got here a couple of radars. It's important to know what is a surface search that looks for other ships and what is an air search that can find aircraft. There's also low altitude search. Got a sonar down here. It's an active sonar for the ship with a base range of 1.7 nautical miles, that's 3,400 yards, and the frequency band is important. And then we get down into the armament. Guns in Harpoon are able to fire on other ships, but they are also able to fire in an anti-aircraft mode. This is the anti-aircraft strength here that will help the ship resist both missile and air attacks. Stepping down further, let's review how to read this. The number in parentheses explains the type of mount. This is a single, this is a triple, this is a quintuple, and the number outside the parentheses is the number of mounts. These are firing arcs, forward, aft. So this is a Fletcher-class destroyer. It's got 2 single mounts that can fire forward, 2 single mounts that can fire aft. It's got a triple torpedo tube on each side, port and starboard, and 1 quintuple torpedo tube that can fire either way. It's also got a Stinger anti-aircraft missile and a Hedgehog anti-submarine weapon. And we'll go into detail on all of the specifics in a bit here. At the bottom we have damage up top and speed down below. As ships accumulate damage, they get more torn up, boilers are blown, shell plating buckled, and they cannot go as fast. Eventually, over here, they get sunk. The way the game mechanics work, critical hits are likely to disable a ship long before anything, before you actually chip it down to 0 damage points. So, with the basic concept of a ship, let's do one more thing. Let's look at what a typical ship health is. A good rule of thumb for the way Harpoon works: if you can do half of a ship's health in 1 turn, you can sink it right away. Otherwise, you're going to have to hit it multiple times and kind of chip down the ladder. So, this is a small destroyer. It's got about 150 damage points. Let's flip forward to something bigger. That's a frigate. Here we go. This is an armored cruiser. 600 damage points. Pretty beefy. And somewhere in here, we should have a USS Iowa variant, 1,000 damage points. So that'll give important context, because now we're going to look briefly at the weapons of these ships before we skim through and look at each one in turn. Here are our toys. I'm gonna try to keep this brief because this can get a little dry, and I'll be putting some pictures up in the video for those of you who aren't quite familiar. Running down the list of missiles, we have the RIM 7 Sea Sparrow, which is a short-range point defense missile. We have the RIM 8 Talos, an old missile, a big missile, very long range, but it is weaker in air strength, more easily duped. We have the Standard Missile 1 medium range. This is kind of a mid-range missile, 25 miles, and it's fairly advanced with a strength of 2.0. The next missile is the namesake of the game, the RGM-84 Harpoon. You'll note over here it has a range of up to 65 nautical miles. It does 40 damage points plus 1 to 3 critical hits. It cruises at a very low altitude. So, if you recall, 40 damage points, we were talking ships in the hundreds. So no ship is going to sink to a single harpoon. There will need to be multiple hits. The Stinger is a man-portable, shoulder-fired anti-air missile. Very short range, 3 nautical miles. Strength of 1.5, which is actually not terrible. It's capable of shooting at aircraft from the front. It does not need to see the hot tailpipes, which distinguishes it from earlier surface-to-air missiles. The Hawk is the surface-to-air missile on the island. It's got a moderate range of 22 miles. It is an older missile, both a Generation 2 seeker and an air-to-air strength of 1.0, meaning it is not the greatest. Also on the island, we will have a P-15 launcher. This is a Soviet design that has a range of up to 43 nautical miles, 47 damage points, which is respectable, plus 1 to 6 critical hits. And it's got a shape charge warhead that gives it an amazing penetration. This is pretty nasty. It is only a second generation seeker, so it can still be duped, but that 47 damage points is potentially a big problem for any of the smaller ships trying to approach the island directly. Moving down, we have our anti-submarine weapons. The Mark 15 Hedgehog dates back to World War II. It's basically a mortar that fires little grenades into the water ahead of the ship at a sonar contact. It does a little bit of damage. It's not likely to hit. ASROC is the modern, the 1980s replacement for Hedgehog. It uses a rocket, ASROC, anti-submarine rocket. It uses a rocket to launch up to 5 miles away a Mark 46 torpedo. Now this is a homing torpedo. So what we're doing here is we're basically lobbing a torpedo way out there. It plops down in the water, turns its seeker on, and goes hunting. So pretty nasty, decent range. The torpedoes themselves, we've got 3 categories here. The Mark 16, also World War II vintage. It's a gyro torpedo. All it does is run in a straight line. It's got a range of about 11,000 yards, speed of 46 knots. It has to contact something to go off, but it does 100 points of damage, more than any of the available missiles and any of the guns, which we'll get to later. So this is our ship killer. It can be fired by the submarines that the Placata Navy has, and it can be fired by the destroyers that both sides have. It's a very short range, so I doubt we'll see it kill ships that haven't already been disabled by other means, but pretty nasty. The Mark 27 is a first-generation passive homing torpedo, short range, low speed, pretty good damage. It can target ships or submarines, which won't really matter since it's submarine launched and only one side has submarines. Finally, we have the Mark 46, Gen 2, active or passive, range of 6 nautical miles, pretty fast. It can dive. Intermediate 5 is 500 meters down, and it can do a lot of damage to a submarine. So these things spiral down in a circle, at first listening passively for the sound of a submarine motor, but once they think they hear it, they'll flip on an active sonar pinger and zip in to take it out. Now let's run down the guns. These are fun. I don't know how much they'll actually come up since, look up here, the range of a Harpoon is 65 nautical miles or 130,000 yards. The ranges of these guns, 9,000 yards, 15,000 yards. So we'll see if we close into a knife fight. The 3-inch 50 was developed as a short-range anti-air gun. I think the only ship that has these is an auxiliary. I do not expect them to matter. The 5-inch guns have been kind of the mainstay of the U.S. small surface combatants for a long time. We have the World War II vintage 38 caliber long and the more modern 54 caliber long. We have the 6-inch 47 on a few of the cruisers, the 8-inch 55 on the Des Moines cruisers, and of course the battleships fling their 6-inch 50. Now note here, the damage on a battleship shell at close range, which is within 5 miles essentially, is as much as one of these anti-ship missiles. So if a battleship gets close to something, 45 damage points, 35 damage points, it's going to put the hurt on it pretty quick. So with that in context, let's do one last thing. It takes 500 damage points to kill a battleship, more or less, which means 10 salvos of 16-inch fire at short range, 10 of these missiles, NATO calls this a Styx, 10 Styx missiles, which have the penetration capability to do full damage. Harpoons do not have that penetration capability, so they're going to do half damage. So let's see, what would that be? 25-ish harpoons to take out a battleship. And lots and lots of gunfire. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context for the weapons these ships can use and exactly how durable they're going to be. With that, let's quickly flip through the ship types available. All right, the Fletcher. These are World War II relics, essentially obsolete by the 1980s. A lot of real-world Latin American navies kept them on for quite a bit longer. What we have here boils down to a decent air search radar, a pretty crappy sonar. We'll see some much better ones later on. It's got kind of enough guns to defend itself a little. It can huck torpedoes at submarines. It's got a stinger for self-defense, and that's about it. You can stick it somewhere to scout with radar. It might hear a submarine, maybe. And if you can cripple an enemy ship, you can drive a Fletcher in there and really put the hurt on it with some torpedoes. Pretty simple. They will probably come up. If one of these is caught on its own outside air cover, that's not going to be enough. Both of these are not going to be enough, and they're going to go down in pretty short order. But they are, I think, important parts of the fleet composition. A Brook escort. This is a later class. Note some things that we now have electronic countermeasures, jammer and decoy. So it's going to fire off chaff and jam incoming missiles. It's got second generation electronic support. It can hear radars from further away. And a better combat system gives it a faster reaction time. It's got, I think this is the same radar. It's got a mediocre surface search radar, a really good 3D radar. That's a bomber at 245 nautical miles for the record, and a small fighter aircraft at 170. And, oh, this is just a navigation radar. It's got the SQS-26 active passive sonar. It's also got a wider frequency band, which is going to be important once we get in the shallows. It's got a passive range, which is good. The Fletcher's sonar is active only. And you'll note the active range is more than double what the Fletcher has. It's also capable of both convergent zone and bottom bounce, which are fancy methods of getting really long-range sonar contacts in deep water. As far as armament goes, we have a single 5-inch gun to plink away with. We've got our first missile launcher, a Mark 22, with 16 SM-1s. We've got a ASROC box with 8 ASROC in it and one set of reloads down below. And we've got some torpedo tubes for over-the-side Mark 46s. So this is going to be a decent ASW ship, and it's going to be a decent anti-air warfare ship. Remember, SM-1, 25 nautical mile range, pretty good. Single prop, which means if certain criticals happen, it loses speed. Still about 130 damage points, but these things can probably survive up to a moderate air assault on their own. A Nox. These were introduced into the U.S. Navy as a cheap anti-submarine frigate. And you'll notice a lot of these are going to kind of fit the same pattern here. We've got a surface search. We've got an air search. Decoys, electronic support. This one's got a better torpedo decoy. SQS-26 again. One gun. 16 ASROC. Now, these were modified to carry harpoons. So they've actually got a salvo of 2 harpoons ready to go that's filling up part of that box launcher. Over the side torpedoes, there's another box launcher on the aft end of the ship with 8 of those Sea Sparrows that we were talking about, and a set of reloads below. So this gives a very basic self-protection AA capability. And most importantly, they have a helicopter on board, which we'll cover in more detail later, but the ability to lay sonobuoys a long distance from the ship, use radars a long distance from the ship, spot enemy ships very far away, drop torpedoes very far away. This adds a lot of flexibility to the boat. Very important. And we are a little bigger and a little tougher. The Des Moines. This is the last of the heavy gun cruisers. This was kind of an evolution of the World War II designs. Served a bit in Vietnam as a gunfire support vessel and never really had the need or the opportunity, depending on how you look at it, to take on other ships. Primary armament, 8-inch 55. And we've got, let's see, what is that? 9 barrels total, 2 forward, 1 aft. 2 triple turrets forward, 1 triple turret aft. We've got a bunch of 5-inch 38 in support. Oh, there's that 3-inch 50 I was talking about, for a total anti-air strength of 9.1, which is excellent. It's going to be very tough to get anything subsonic close to the ship. 2 helicopters, 600 damage points, and we have armor. This deck armor, not quite enough to stop a Harpoon, but it'll stop some of the weaker airdropped bombs. So, pretty tough ship. Even though the armor's not the greatest, it's going to take a lot of munitions to put this thing out of the fight. The Cleveland. This ship was, I believe, laid down during World War II and then modified after as one of the earliest guided missile cruisers in the US Navy. Its primary armament is its aft twin launcher with 46 Rim 8 Talos. If you recall, the range on these things is close to 100 miles. Very nasty missile, very long range. This is going to give the Placatans an excellent area defense capability. And if anything slips past the Talos, it's still got a decent amount of anti-aircraft fire on board. It's also got a triple 6-inch turret, but strangely enough, if we look at the 6-inch, it's doing 20 damage, 14 damage. If we look at the Talos is doing 40 damage. This thing has, I think, a 900-pound warhead, and it's going 2,000 knots. That'll sting. That's pretty nasty in an anti-ship mode. 400 damage points, kind of middle of the pack resilience, and piddling to no armor. I had to do this one just for my own sake. The Iowa-class battleship, the big boy of World War II. We have a ton of armor. This is in centimeters of steel, for those of you who are questioning. This will keep out any of the guns, and I believe any of the missiles except for the sticks. This will keep out any of the missiles. The sticks will hit the belt deck. This deck will keep out a diving harpoon. This belt will keep out anything else. And it's got 200, think of them as dummy hit points, of torpedo defense per side. So even if a submarine sneaks up on this thing, it's not going down without a fight. Primary armament, you know what it is. 9 of the biggest naval rifles ever made. Well, not the biggest. I know the Yamato existed, but this is cooler. We've got an AA strength of 9.8 because there are just so many freaking barrels of 5-inch 38 fire on this thing. And we have an aft pad with 4 helicopters, almost 1,100 hit points. Very tough, but maybe the most valuable part for this campaign will be the helicopters for anti-submarine patrol. We will see. I don't know if this thing will ever actually get within gun range of an opponent. I really hope it does. The inner geek in me would love that, but we will have to see. This one never existed. I think it's cool, and I'm including it. There was a brief discussion of what to do with some of the incomplete Iowa ships after World War II. And someone said, let's build them into amphibious assault ships. And here's basically how that was going to go. We're going to take the aft triple turret off, so we're down to 6 barrels. We're going to take a bunch of the 5 inches off. We're going to add some ASROC for submarine self-defense. I threw on a Stinger team, just because it seemed reasonable. And then we build on this giant flight deck hangar thing. We add a bunch of landing craft with some cranes to drop them, and a centerline elevator to get troops, trucks, tanks, all of that jazz up to the top. And there you have it. It's got a flight deck, so I gave it a mixture of AH-1 Cobras and UH-1 Hueys. It's got slightly fewer hit points in the Harpoon rulebook. I'm not sure exactly why. And I'm noting down here, all hits 50% likely to use the surface combatant table and the critical table, and 50% likely to use the aviation ship critical table. And all the aviation facilities are above armor, 2 centimeters of armor in the flight deck, but the engine and flooding use the Iowa stats because a battleship is built around a sealed armored citadel, but we've tacked a flight deck kind of on top of that. Think of like building a little wooden hut on top of a castle. You know, the castle might survive an artillery bombardment. That wooden hut on top, probably not. So this is the Placata flagship, is where their whole battalion of Marines is stationed. This is how they're going to land, and we'll see whether or not the Odontons can take it out before it arrives at its destination. The Odontons have an actual amphibious assault ship, the Iwo Jima class. This is only a medium-sized ship, but it's got a pretty large air group, 6 Harriers, 8 Hueys, and 2 Sea Knights. That's a jump jet, a small utility helicopter, and a large utility helicopter for reference. We've got just a couple of those 3-inch guns. We have 2 of the Sea Sparrow launchers with extra ammo, and it does take 30 minutes to reload this. The game rules say 3 minutes. I say I don't believe you. So 30 minutes to reload. We also have 2 Phalanx. This is a machine gun with an integrated radar and fire control system for anti-ship missile defense. This gets its own little AA strength, and it gets 2 shots because it is a fully automatic system. Automatic in the detect, track, engage sense, not automatic in the firing the machine gun sense. It does fire in fully automatic mode. This is a tricky vocab problem. It detects and engages targets on its own without operator input, and when it fires at several thousand inches, not inches per minute, rounds per minute. Hopefully that clears it up. So, 400 damage points, little bit of a glass jaw, and just because I had to, I threw in one little ye old Higgins boat, which can hardly carry anything, but I felt they needed at least a boat to call them an amphibious ship. You know, you can't do it all with helicopters, right? Or can you? I don't know. Last but not least, our support ships. We have 2 of them. This AOE, Fast Oiler and Ammunition, I believe. This is a supply ship. It carries a whole bunch of gun ammo, infinite small gun ammo, all other munitions as assigned. It can carry extra ammo. It has just a ton of fuel. This keeps strike groups going. If these get lost, I will impose penalties on the force that loses them. And also, I have a cost written down for these somewhere, and they will penalize politically whichever side loses them. 350 damage points, but the critical hit table for supply ships is brutal. There's a lot of chances for all of this ammo to cook off, and you'd be surprised how quickly you can burn through these damage points. We got some 3-inch 50s, we got some 5-inch 38s, and we have a Stinger team. That's it as far as defense goes. So if one of these gets caught on its own, it's going to be a bad time. Finally, we will see if submarines can play a role in this campaign. I ran out of money to buy good submarines, so this is what we have. These are World War II vintage boats, upgraded under the Guppy program. They have a snorkel. They can go 9 knots while snorkeling. They have a surface search radar on the periscope. They have a pretty crappy sonar, but they're packing 6 torpedo tubes up front, 4 in the back, all of them capable of firing that heavyweight Mark 16. This is just about the only thing in the game that can potentially put 200 to 300 damage points on a target in a single turn. It's going to be very tricky to use them, especially because they're going to need to snorkel a lot. They have a crappy battery, and they're very vulnerable while snorkeling. While they're on the surface, they do have a Stinger team. They've only got 4 rounds, but that may be their saving grace. They have different surface and submerged speeds. You'll note that both of these are higher than their snorkel speed. While running on the surface, they can use their diesel engines and just run until they run out of fuel, which I didn't write down because these things had insanely large fuel tanks. That's why they were called fleet boats. They were designed to go, 10,000 miles with the rest of the fleet. Submerged, the way Harpoon works. Yes, you can run at these speeds, but it's off of your battery power. I can creep for 100 hours at 4 knots. I can run at 17 knots for, I think, less than 1 hour. The energy cost of going high speeds increases quadratically. So, very bad idea to sprint while submerged, which makes positioning these boats a tricky proposition. So, that is the last of the ships. Let's go learn about some planes. Aircraft in Harpoon are fairly complicated, mainly because they're so flexible and customizable. Let's look at what you need to know to run one. Each aircraft has a maneuverability rating. This helps with dodging missiles and dogfighting. It has a size and a signature, usually the same. Electronic countermeasures, radar warning receivers, which let it know when it's being locked on by an enemy radar. Damage value, which is for computing gun kills. I don't know if that will ever come up. A bomb sight. Refueling options. This is in-air refueling. The type of engine occasionally matters. It has a flight ceiling, a cruise range. This is the weight of internal fuel, the maximum payload it can carry, and 75% of that payload. And then a lot of aircraft can support drop tanks, which add a little bit of extra range. If they have guns, you need to know the gun strength to compare against damage values for gun kills. And there are 3 throttle settings: cruise, full military power, and afterburner. Those produce different speeds at different altitudes, low, medium, high. If this is sounding like a lot, yes. I wish it were simpler, but this is what we got. Aircraft have radars, just like ships. The FA-18 was the first of the really modern strike fighters with a well-integrated modern radar. It's got both an air search, this is a look down, shoot down capability, with a long range. That's a bomber-sized target, 160 miles away. And it's got a surface search mode that it can flick back and forth between. This was very novel at the time. This is spotting a battleship 160 miles away and a destroyer 66 miles away. So, pretty good stuff. Then you have just a litany of options for each aircraft. This is a pod with a laser spot tracker and camera. And then we get to the meat of the issue, which is loadouts. Each aircraft has a number of stations. It has a number of munitions that are compatible with it. As long as those fit within the weight budget, you can put them on the aircraft, which generates all sorts of different combinations of ranges and capabilities. For example, just looking at the Hornet here, we can throw on 3 drop tanks for maximum endurance, a couple of AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, and 4 AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, and get kind of a fighter thing out of it. We can also load up on 3 drop tanks and 2 Mark 84 2,000-pound bombs. Run off 700 miles away, blow something up, come 700 miles back. It also has walleye guided missiles, well, glide bombs, and rockeye cluster munitions. Lots of flexibility. Each of these is good at different things, and you have to be very picky about what you put in the air when. If you have Hornets in the air with a lot of missiles, and then a bunch of boats come out along, there is not much you can do. You've wasted that opportunity of having those birds in that position at the right time. So, let's go following the same pattern, look at what the munitions are capable of, and then let's look at the aircraft that are going to fight the campaign. Our first objective will probably be air superiority, and the way that is achieved is with air-to-air missiles. From the top, we have 2 variants of the AIM-7 Sparrow, the Echo 11 and the Mike. Now, these came out several years apart. I priced them very differently, and so each side has different amounts of them and different access to them. This range, 22 miles versus 31, decent difference. This air-to-air strength affects how hard it is for an enemy aircraft to dodge it, and this sensor generation is how hard it is for an enemy aircraft to jam or confuse it. So the AIM-7 Mike is more lethal than the AIM-7 Echo in pretty much every way, in addition to being longer ranged. The AIM-9 Lima is an infrared homing missile, short range, 10 miles. It is probably the most lethal missile on the field today, with that strength of 3.0 and a 3rd gen seeker, but you got to really close in to use it. We also have F-14s out and about. They have the AIM-54 Phoenix with a nearly 50 nautical mile range. This thing weighs like 1,000 pounds. It's absolutely a beast of a missile. And it has a bore sight mode, the rules call it, where within 10 nautical miles, you can just let this thing rip off the rail and it goes at a strength of 2.5 instead of 2.0. So that's pretty neat. Oh, I suppose over here we should probably talk about this. These are all aspect missiles. You can shoot them at the front of an aircraft, the back, whatever. The Sparrows cannot be used in a dogfight. The others can. And the AIM-7 Mike and the AIM-54 can target planes in other altitude bands without penalty. The others cannot. But once we've swept the skies clear of enemy aircraft, we want to blow up their ships. Duh. This is a naval war game. That's what we're here for. At the top, the AGM-45 Shrike. This is a passive radar homing missile. It listens for enemy radars and homes in on them. The advantage of this one is that from 46 nautical miles away, you can fly in, pop up, shoot it up at 45 degrees. It'll go sailing through the sky, and then as it's falling, pick up that radar signal and home in. So if you know approximately where the enemy radar is, you can launch this from a very long way away. The downside, it does no damage, only critical hits, targeting the affected radar. And this is a first generation seeker. You have to tune this thing on the boat. You take off with your Shrikes preset for a specific enemy radar. So if you run into the wrong type of ship, tough luck. It's just dead weight on your wings. I suppose you could snap them off anyway and try to scare them with the smoke and noise, but it's not going to home in. Next, the AGM-62 Walleye. This thing is a glide bomb. It's got a TV camera in the front that can lock on to the contrast of an object. 18 nautical mile range, which is, importantly, outside Stinger range. It's outside anti-aircraft artillery range. It's outside Sea Sparrow range. It is within range of a Standard Missile 1, and it's within range of a Talos. Almost 50 points of damage to a ship. High penetration. These are nasty and they're cheap. Both sides have a good number of them. So once those standoff surface-to-air missiles disappear, these are going to start taking a toll on ships, I'm pretty sure. The AGM-65 Maverick, also a TV seeker. Short range, 8,000 yards. This is it's got a rocket motor, so it's a missile, not a glide bomb. It's got a little shape charge in the front that'll, plink away at a ship. Huge amount of penetration, though. But other than that, not very useful against, except maybe the small ships. The AGM-84, the air-launched version of the Harpoon. It's got a slightly shorter range, which I believe is because it doesn't include a solid rocket booster at the back. But everything else is the same. It cruises, 10 feet off the ocean surface at almost Mach 1. Does 40 damage, won't penetrate much. Some of the helicopters can fire BGM-71 TOWs. That's tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided missiles. Very short range, very low damage, but high penetration. I think these will come up if the Placatans get their ship within, 100 miles or so of the island. They're going to start picking off Odonton armored vehicles using their helicopters. We have various flavors of laser-guided bomb. A lot of these are the same. You can glide them in from a few miles away. They do decent amounts of damage. Penetration middling. This is another one in the category of you are screwed if you lose your air defense. There's nothing... if you lose your guns and your surface-to-air missiles, it's just a matter of time. The enemy can just come pick you apart 60 damage points at a time. Then we get the unguided stuff. Everything above this line is going to be tracked, and both sides had to pay for up front. So if you want 20 harpoons, that's probably one fewer aircraft that you can use to launch them. All of this stuff, this is all free. We've got 70 millimeter rockets, 5-inch rockets, cluster bombs, different sizes of unguided bomb. All of this is just steel with explosives in it. And then we have Oh, this is just my notes on what the different types of rocket launchers do. So, I suppose the important thing to note here is damage values. Rockets are not going to kill anything quick. Rock eyes only do critical hits to certain components exposed on the top, but enough unguided bombs laid into a ship will put it down. You know, there are a few ships out there that have 130-ish damage points. 2 Mark 84s is all it takes. And with a really good bomb sight and a close run, there's a chance that a lot of these aircraft could roll in with 2 Mark 84s and put them both on target. So, not a negligible threat, but probably one for later in the campaign after everyone has shot their bolt with guided munitions. So let's look at the planes. I'm going to try to keep this even briefer than the ships by just highlighting advantages, weaknesses, unique capabilities of each plane. So, FA-18, strike fighter, can do either role fairly well. Advantages, it's got a really good radar that has an air-to-air mode and an air-to-ground mode and is good in both. It can carry a large variety of munitions, air-to-air aim 7s, walleyes, and all of the unguided stuff. Very versatile aircraft. Weakness, initial cruise range of 760 nautical miles. Drop tanks take up valuable weapon stations, leaving it with a total combat range of about 1,400 nautical miles. Not ideal for this theater. The A4M, an attack aircraft. Small, cheap. That's the good part. It can carry a lot of different stuff. Walleyes, shrikes, which is, I think, a unique capability. It is the only one that can fire off shrikes. Cluster munitions, unguided bombs. It also has fairly short legs and sacrifices a lot to get drop tanks on. You know, with 2 drop tanks, this thing is only carrying a single walleye or 2 shrikes. So you have to either live with a very low range and top off at your aerial refueler, or sacrifice a lot of payload capability. But they're small, they don't show up on radar as well, and they are cheap. Helicopters. Attack helicopter. Very short range, lightly armed. We've got tows that do like 10 points of damage. Missiles, not missiles, rockets that do like 10 points of damage. It can't be in the air very long. Its maximum combat radius is 200 nautical miles. But it can shoot off AIM-9s if you want to dogfight with... I don't know why you'd do that. But they're going to be great for picking off armored vehicles on the ground. UH-1 Hueys. Throw 2 squads of dudes in the back. That's it. That's the pitch. CH-46 Sea Knight. Throw even more dudes in the back, or sling load a few thousand pounds underneath. That adds some flexibility and will help the Odontons get their vehicles onto the island a little faster. The F-14, beautiful plane. What's the pitch here? We have an enormous cruise range to start, 1,800 nautical miles. Awesome. It has, I didn't even write it here. This third column here, this is the AIM-54 Phoenix. Can pack up to 4 of them and still land. Longest range missile in the game. And look what we pair that with. The AUG-9 3rd generation radar. Look down, shoot down, which means you can look at targets below you, which, believe it or not, aircraft could not do for a long time. But look at this range. Spot a bomber almost 200 miles away. Spot a small aircraft 120 miles away. This thing will see you. It can blast over to you on afterburner at, was that Mach 3 something? Mach 2.5? And it can sling the longest range missile available at you. Pretty sweet. They're big, medium size, radar target, and they're expensive. So losing them will hurt. SH-2D Sea Sprite, itty bitty helicopter. Pretty neat thing. It's got a surface search radar. Start finding enemy ships 40 to 70 miles away. The neat thing about this is you have your ship here. If you turn on your radar and blast that emission out, if someone is listening to you, they now have a line of bearing to your location. They don't know exactly how far away you are, but if you keep doing this, they can gauge, if you're moving, they can guess, okay, if he's moving at 20 knots, about where does his position end up? And they can even shoot missiles at you without ever turning on their own radar. But if instead you take off your little helicopter and it goes over here for 15 minutes and it searches, then now that line of bearing is useless to the enemy. They just know that your ship is somewhere within, what's the radius here? Within 100 nautical miles of that line of bearing. Junk. So, it can also carry sonobuoys to hunt submarines, and it can drop torpedoes on them. Pretty nifty all around, very short legs. The F-16 Fighting Falcon brings a couple of things to the fight. It's very maneuverable, on par with the Hornet and ahead of the Tomcat. It's got a great modern bomb sight. It's also got one of those modern integrated radars that has both air-to-air and air-to-surface modes. It can fit a jammer pod for increased survivability against radar missiles. And it can fit, well, the munition options aren't great. It's basically limited to AIM-9 Sidewinders and unguided munitions. So if it's going to attack anything on the ground, it has to come within AAA range. If it's going to attack anything in the air, it has to come within radar missile range. Not ideal. The other limitation, it is refueled by boom only. Neither side has tankers with a refueling boom. So these things, though they can load up on gas on the ground, they cannot refuel in the air, which limits their flexibility a bit. Odontos also has a couple of these relics. F-4 Phantoms, 1960s tech, Vietnam era, got a really crappy air intercept radar. So this only works at the same altitude. It cannot find surface targets. And against comparable fighter-sized aircraft, we're looking at about 30 miles of range. Not great. It can also carry a jammer pod. Okay. It does have some benefits. Oh, boom refueling again. So, it does have some benefits. Wide variety of munitions available. We have radar AIM-7 missiles. We have AIM-9s. We've got unguided bombs. We've got Mavericks. We've got Walleyes. We've got Shrikes. So pretty much the whole gamut of missiles that may be relevant, aside from harpoons. It can also go up to very high altitude when on afterburner. That's pretty neat. That's actually higher than some of the missiles that are available can engage. So pretty cool. It can carry a lot of gas, but it doesn't actually get that great of a range out of it. And a lot of its loadouts put it in the heavy category, meaning it has to dump tanks or use this terrible 1.0 maneuver rating. The other unique thing, it has the option for either the PAVE Spike or PAVE TAC laser designators, which can designate up to 5 and 10 miles respectively. If it's carrying either of those, it can use laser-guided bombs. This is the first aircraft we've seen that has that capability. It can also designate for other aircraft. So you could have multiple F4s roll in. Only one of them has to have a designator, and all of them can drop on that laser spot. Pretty cool. The A6. This is the biggest attack aircraft I think the US Navy ever fielded. It is not maneuverable. It is a pretty decent size. It's fairly slow, but it has a surface search radar with a very long range. That's nearly 100 miles for any target of note. It's got a laser designator, so it can use laser-guided bombs. And most importantly, it has, where are we? AGM-84 Harpoon capability. So this thing can load up and really put a hurting on something. It can also tote around just a ton of, look at that, 28 500-pound bombs. And let's look at this range. Up to 2,000 nautical miles, unrefueled. It's got a probe, so it can refuel off a tanker. It's got a decent bomb sight. This thing, oh, and it can carry a buddy store with 4 tanks for a total of 2,400 nautical miles. And it can give some of that away to other A6s. So, if you're within, what is that? A 750 nautical mile radius of their base, they can come drop 4 harpoons on you each. That's pretty sweet. Also, Shrikes are in here as well. So, very versatile attack aircraft, large payload, long range. 28 Mark 82s. We talked about going to be very difficult to actually kill a battleship. 28 Mark 82s might get you there. The Harrier. This one is a unique short takeoff vertical landing jet. It's fairly maneuverable, has a very small payload limit, and a very short range. Look at that, 250, what is that, almost 300 nautical mile radius. This is hardly better than a helicopter. It can carry drop tanks. It can carry AIM-9 Sidewinders, which will be useful because this gives the Odontos Iwo Jima class ship its own combat air patrol that it can project at any point out in the ocean. So that'll be very helpful and flexible. I don't expect them to work too much in the ground attack or anti-shipping role. Huge limitation. No radar. Daytime engagements only, visual range only. They can be vectored in by the radar of a ship, but remember how I was talking earlier about emissions giving you away? The Odontons will have to be very strategic about when and how they use radar pickets in order to avoid being sniped. Oh, speaking of emitters and emitter tracking, the ORV-1D is a recon aircraft. Yes, it can technically carry a couple small rocket pods, but it's really no good at that. What it can do is it can loiter for a couple hours at a slow speed, and it has an emitter location system. So if this thing is up in the sky and it's moving, the bearing to a fixed SAM site, for example, will continually change as it moves. This emitter location system can automatically find, let's say, the GPS coordinates, even though GPS, I don't think, existed in 1984. It can pinpoint exactly where that radar is. And it's second generation, so it can see radars even further away. So this is interesting because if you look at the radar horizon limits, if this thing is in the air, if a Tomcat at high altitude turns on its air search radar within, I think, 600 miles, this thing will immediately pick it up and not pinpoint its location, but definitely pinpoint the bearing. So, interesting capability. We will see how relevant it ends up being. And finally, yes, the last one of the batch, the S-3A Viking. This is a maritime patrol anti-submarine warfare aircraft. It has, again, second generation electronic support. It's got a FLIR camera. This is a thermal camera for classifying ships, investigating things from long distance, and a magnetic anomaly detector. I don't think we covered this on the SH2. It has one as well. But this is, think of it kind of like the metal detector you use at the beach. It's a boom that sticks out of the back of the plane that can detect submarines underneath the ocean. Pretty neat. It has to be very close for this to work, though. It's a turbofan aircraft, cruises at a decent speed. It's got a very long range. What is that, 2,400 without any drop tanks? It has the best surface search radar in the scenario, spotting targets of interest out to 130 miles. It can carry, let's see, I think this is 60 total sonobuoys working on a variety of frequencies and different ranges. I worked it out. If it's looking for a snorkeling submarine, these buoys can cover something like a 20 nautical mile line. Scratch that, a 200 nautical mile line, because this can hear a snorkeling submarine from 10 miles away. These will be very lethal to those subs because they can also carry Mark 46 torpedoes to drop on the submarine. They can also carry depth charges and mines, which may or may not have a role in the campaign. And that's the last of our aircraft. And so, with a slightly better grasp of relative capabilities, let's review the fleet structure for the aggressors. We have the Iowa Commando. It's got helicopters on board, both attack and transport. It cannot produce its own combat air patrol, but we have a cruiser with 100 nautical mile Talos missiles. We have two, I believe these are Brook class with 25 nautical mile SM-1s, and we have a couple of Knox class with short range RIM 7s. So we have a decent amount of anti-air missile capacity built into this fleet. As far as anti-surface goes, neither of these cruisers is a slouch in that category. The battleship is, of course, going to be devastating, but it's got that whole troop compartment stapled on the back. That's pretty risky to drag into gunfire range. So I believe each of these has 2 harpoons ready to go and 2 in reserve. That's their kind of surface missile capability. And once they get within about 20-25 miles, the SM-1s and the Talos have a surface-to-surface mode. These ships are not particularly durable. They are expensive. That's risky. This ship is moderately durable, very expensive, but has missiles to defend itself. The armored cruisers and the commando battleship are very, very tough, and I will be surprised if one of them goes down in the next 10 days. We also have 4 destroyers, guns, torpedoes, radar, and the 4 submarines, which, again, torpedoes, very short range. Extra stuff we have ashore, well, probably on one of our oilers, or supply ships. Got a lot of 16-inch shells, extra Talos, extra SM-1, just to keep that air bubble intact. Plenty of torpedoes for the submarines to use. A decent number of torpedoes to defend against submarines. Now this is technically wasted because there are no enemy submarines. The way I originally did the scenario is I built several different little fleet elements, and then I randomly assigned them to each side. So there's wastage in there, because in the real world they would have to invest in an anti-submarine capability. But in our little scenario, there's no submarines relevant. That's just how it shook out. Their air wing, F-14s, the best fighter available, and 40 AIM-54 missiles to feed them with. That's a heck of a punch, and I think they should use it early to sweep the skies clean and free up air operations for their very small attack fleet. F-18s can fire off harpoons, which they have a very limited stock of. F-18s can fire off walleyes that they have more of. They have a lot of Mavericks, which, remember, require getting into a ship's AAA envelope to fire. And they have A4 Skyhawks. The Skyhawks can fire off Mavericks, walleyes, and Shrikes, and, of course, all sorts of unguided bombs. But remember, using any aircraft to fire off unguided bombs requires flying a sometimes $20 million asset right into the teeth of a bunch of AAA. Not a great idea. They have helicopters with anti-tank missiles, transport helicopters, transport, just plain transport aircraft. These don't have a stat sheet. They're C-130Fs and KC-130Fs. The only thing that you need to know is how much fuel these can offload, which we'll cover in the next video as we do some strike planning. So, fairly small air wing, fairly small strike component to the air wing, really relies on those fighters to sweep the skies clean and let everyone else do their thing. Let's take a look at the Odontos side of things. Let's focus on the island first, the area that we got to defend. We have F-16s and F-4s available. Even if all 4 of these things are airborne, this is not going to be much more than a speed bump if all 8 F-14s come down at the same time. At best, you're going to make them waste a bunch of Phoenixes. At worst, you don't know the Phoenix is inbound, and we're going to lose all of our aircraft right off that bat. These A6s, with the Harpoons on the island, do project a decent anti-shipping envelope. You know, remember, they've got like a 700-mile radius. It's only 800 miles all the way up here to the Placatan base. So anywhere out here, if they can find the fleet, they can go swing some harpoons at it. And these, at the time we're playing, these are very, very nasty to counter. None of the dedicated anti-sea skimmer systems are in play yet. So these are going to be pretty tough to kill. We also have the RV-1, that's that scout aircraft with the emitter location system. and the S3. This S3 is probably going to be chopped to submarine patrol because there's a lot of ocean to cover. That RV1 will probably be in the air intermittently, just snooping about. The fact that this exists at all means that the Placatans have to be very picky about when they turn their radar on, especially if both of these are in the air at the same time. So if one's here and one's there, and a ship lights up here, boom, we've got a crossfix right away. And guess who's coming to check out that general area? It's two A6s loaded for bear with harpoons. To defend the island after the fighters get obliterated by phoenixes, we have a Hawk battery, which recall is a 22 nautical mile air defense bubble. And we have a Styx battery. Now, I'm going to put the picture up here on the screen of the real system that I'm kind of stealing. But I decided that this one is broken, either a training accident or spare parts or whatever. Only one of the two launch tubes is working, so they got to shoot and scoot somewhere for 30 minutes to pick up one of their reloads. So it's a salvo size of 1. If they can coordinate it with a harpoon strike, that'd be pretty nice. But even then, just there are plenty of ships in the Placatan military that would not like to eat a Styx. One of the heavy cruisers or the battleship could probably take it straight to the face, but this still imposes some serious risks on just sailing right up to the door of the island. The Air Forces ashore. To add it up, that's 10 fighter aircraft. Really closer to 8 effective, I would say. The F4s are pretty junk. If these guys all come out at once, they could contest the airspace with the Tomcats. An F-16 fully loaded with drop tanks actually outranges a Tomcat by a little bit. Well, the Tomcats can hit their tankers and project even further down. But both the F-16s and the F-4s have to figure out how they're going to close that 20, 30 mile gap where Phoenixes can shoot, but they can't. We have 2 other A6s and a decent stock of harpoons ashore. Excellent anti-ship bubble. And some of these might end up getting shuffled out to the island as the scenario develops. We have the Harriers, which are going to provide local combat air patrol for the fleet as it moves around. We got another RV-1 for scouting and missions, and another Viking for anti-submarine patrol. If these Vikings have to find the submarines while snorkeling, because once they go to electric motors, they're darn near impossible to find in open water. We covered transport helicopters and transport planes already. Note, they have 1 tanker. It's a large aircraft. It cannot maneuver, which means that they have to worry. It's a serious worry that an F-14 is going to snoop down here, find that tanker, and blast it out of the sky. And that will really constrain their options. We have a small number of the good sparrows, a larger number of the bad sparrows, lots of AIM-9s, shrikes, a large number of walleyes, and I think the only thing that can use the walleyes on this side is the F4s. Lots of Mavericks, which F4s and I think A6s. Don't quote me on that. Harpoons only usable by the A6. And laser-guided bombs, always usable by the A6 and usable by the F4 if it has that pod attached. Definitely a much more strike-oriented Air Force than the Placatans, but none of that works if the Tomcats knock them all out of the air. We will have to see how that goes. And finally, the little Odonton fleet. We have one battleship, which honestly probably isn't going to be much use because they can't afford to sail it straight into the enemy fleet. It'll get torn up. One battleship, one heavy cruiser. I'm not sure what these are going to do. If they ride shotgun with the amphibious assault ship, then they're essentially wasted. Their anti-aircraft fire cannot protect this ship. All they can hope to do is soak up a missile or two. However, if they go off on their own to tangle with the enemy fleet, they have to contend with an enemy battleship and 2 enemy heavy cruisers. That's probably not going to go well unless those are seriously softened up. This thing, we've discussed its air group to death. We have one Nox class with very short-range surface-to-air missiles and a couple harpoons stowed away, but really not much of a punch here. 3 destroyers loaded up with torpedoes. This is going to help if the Air Force can do their side of the bargain and cripple some enemy ships. And finally, they've got plenty of spare harpoons, plenty of spare Sea Sparrows, and a decent anti-submarine package. They also have a strong advantage in the number of helicopters available. Hopefully that'll help them scout first. And they only have 2 supply ships. This is a point of risk for them as well. So, smaller amount of assets everywhere except in aerial strike. We will have to be delicate with balancing when and how the fighters get committed. Because if we fumble the fighters and don't knock out a bunch of their Tomcats, then it's open season in the air. And open season in the air means open season on the fleet. So, that is, I hope, a not too thorough overview of all of the various systems that are going to be battling it out over this area. I hope that as this plays out, we'll be able to establish a understanding of how system capabilities at the tactical level can achieve effects up to the strategic level if employed correctly and employed with maybe a dash of luck on the side of the more undergunned parts. So that's going to be all for tonight. Thank you guys for listening, and tune in next video. We're going to talk about strike planning and get the very first combat of our campaign moving. Until then, happy gaming.